So I'm the communications director for Teachers Union in Ohio.
Nice.
My experience is as a union organizer and communicator, and I'm a relatively new tarot person. Picked it up during the pandemic and have really diving pretty deep into it for lack of anything else in the world to do.
That's no joke. I mean, I think that if there's worse hobbies that people could have gotten into in the pandemic, I could, but
Yeah.
yeah, I could see that. Uh, and we picked a specific card. We picked the Seven of Swords. Can you tell me a little bit about what drew you to that card?
Yeah. So in general, I'm really drawn to swords in pretty much any deck that I've worked with. Swords, the work that I do, organizing, persuading, communicating, really falls into the realm of swords and air. And I really especially love them in your deck because I love birds. And I really love all the ace through 10 minors in your deck. Because I feel like without a human face in there, you actually, like, at least for me, I'm able to like relate to the cards in a different way. But the Seven of Swords specifically, I think you did a great job of capturing kind of like the positive side of it, but also like I was really struck by how some of the I have it with me too. How
Yeah,
some of the associations matched up, and yeah. So I guess just kind of specifically the being Seven of Swords, the way that the Rider Waite system matches this up with Moon and Aquarius astrologically. And then when you look at the associated minor cards for that, you have the High Priestess for the Moon and the Star for Aquarius.
sure.
And so one thing I've gotten into with tarot is looking at the Kabbalah connections. And so the Hebrew letters for those cards are Sadi for Aquarius, and Gimel for High Priestess. So those translate into camel and fishhook. And so just looking at this card,
Yeah.
seeing this animal like working its way across the sand dunes to eventually catch a fish, I'm like, no idea if that was intentional at all, but I'm like, this is really beautiful.
That's super cool. Like two things I think I've noted doing these interviews. There are a lot of things that kind of match up or line up with the cards that I didn't like intentionally, consciously intend, which are cool to see. People find things that are there, with regardless of my intent, which is awesome. The other thing is Rachel Pollack, who is a person I really like on tarot. She really, really went into the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life associations, and I didn't follow it as closely as I could have, but it's something that's fascinating. The people that I've read and really like on the tarot have done an awesome job looking into that. That's very cool that you found that in there. Uh,
Yeah, and actually the other part that matches up to the Tree of Life is that so the Tree of Life is like the 10 emanations, the 10 Sephirot, and the one
yeah.
for 7 is Netzach, which is victory.
Mm,
And like the people that do Kabbalah and Tarot, they kind of view that as the card showing you what you need to achieve victory in that suit. With like valor for the wands, where you're kind of like fighting out your passions. But then I think you did a great job of nailing that aspect of it by focusing in on the cleverness, and yeah.
I like that connection that you make between maybe this card and organizing and cleverness. Do you have a sense of kind of you do organizing, you do labor organizing? I'm curious, kind of what is that like, or how do you compare those things? The idea of trying to use your skill as an organizer. How do you, I just be curious about that relationship?
Yeah. So definitely organizing and communicating about union issues is a lot about using language that kind of reframes things and gets people to think of things like the power dynamic, as far as, how things really work in a workplace. But also a big part of organizing is about not saying the wrong thing, about like not getting, so excited, about not like maybe putting anxieties in people's heads. And so I think kind of the, with the swords, I always think it's always kind of like the battle of ideas like outside your mind, but also the battle of ideas inside your mind. And I think definitely that comes into play with organizing. And then even more so, you're worried about what you're putting into the other person's head, and making sure that you're giving them, positive and accurate representations of what a union is and the changes that they can make if they form a union at the workplace.
That's beautiful, man. I love that. Like the idea of a change in perspective and careful to, taking care with what you said. That's kind of cool. And being able to see the different power dynamics from a different angle. That's awesome. What got you into tarot over the pandemic? I'm curious kind of what started you down the path? Do you have a sense of it?
So actually, and this might kind of come back to the Seven of Swords. I don't know if you know that meme that was working its way around social media, of the first panel is the Seven of Swords, from the Rider-Waite deck, and it's like me absolutely twisted, bringing home a bunch of swords, and then like the next image is the Nine of Swords, and it's like me the next night wondering what I'm going to do with all these swords. So like honestly, like that meme like got me interested. I started like just going down a Wikipedia hole. And then I mentioned it, that I was interested in it. And my friend Sabrina, who I think you're going to be interviewing as well for
Yes.
the Six of Swords, she sent me my first deck and recommended Rachel Pollack's book, The 78 Degrees
Yeah,
of
that's a good
Wisdom,
one.
as like a good starting point. And once I saw the Kabbalah connection, because that's something I've always had an interest in, but what I've had an interest in was learning about Jewish Kabbalah, and in Jewish Kabbalah, they never mention tarot because it's like not part of it.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's the same themes and the same ideas. And there's some, there's obviously a lot of overlap. So once I saw that connection, I got really into it. And it's kind of gotten my brain working again, like actually like learning and reading about stuff and like writing notes and like, just kind of like studying something for the first time in a long time. So it's been really great. And I felt like just feeling a really good connection with a lot of cards.
That's so cool. And what are you doing now with them? So you kind of doing like polls? Are you asking questions? Kind of what's your or are you still kind of researching associations before you start asking for questions?
Yeah.
How are you at on it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I do a card a day, and I've been doing that for most of the past year, and then I've done some like 2 and 3 card readings, both for myself and for some friends, and I've been a little bit intimidated by like larger larger spreads. That's pretty much like probably the next thing I really need to learn, but I've been getting pretty comfortable, with like 2 or 3 card spreads, things to ask a question. For New Year's, I did a lot. I got my friends to be my guinea pigs, and I did a lot of 2 card readings of like the energy they should like seek out and receive for the year, and the energy that they should try to shed off. And that was really fun.
That's cool. I like that polarity. It seems kind of weird to jump topics, but I've got these dice, these weird oracular dice from a guy on the internet that I really like, a magician on the internet. And but kind of what you were just saying, there's a opposite. There's like a thing that you should move towards, and there's a thing that you should be avoiding, or you'll have to. Yeah, I really like what you're doing with that 2 card spread. That sounds very cool. That sounds interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely something I got out of out of one of the books that I've been looking through. One thing that I actually wanted to ask you, so I've been watching a lot of your other video series, and they talk more in depth about the species. And I'll be honest, I enjoy birds, but I do not know much detail about them, especially the black-crowned night heron. So I was actually curious, like if there's any more you could say about why you chose that.
Oh yeah. So the black-crowned night heron is this bird. It's probably like slightly larger than a football, maybe, but it's not as big as say a really big blue heron or something you might have seen that might be practically staring you in the eye. It's a kind of a middle-sized bird, and they're really conspicuous on along Lake Erie. So I think you're in Columbus. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I used to live in Pittsburgh for a while before that.
Yeah. So all along the lake, especially in the fall, it's super wild to see all through Cleveland and Sandusky, Lorraine, that whole kind of corridor there along Lake Erie. These birds are there in the summer and in the fall, and you can just hear them. They make this horrible sound, this prehistoric sound. And they're kind of horrifying. But they're predators, but they have to be smart, right? Like you say, not doing the wrong thing. They're not the biggest, baddest bird around, but they're but big enough, and so they have to move carefully, and they have to be smart, and they have to kind of live by their wits throughout the year. So, and the image is actually of these dunes over on the east side of the lake, where there's this just huge. There aren't many of these kind of sand dunes anymore left on Lake Erie, where it's got kind of this really wild Atlantic Ocean almost feel and plant life habitat there. But that's where that one was kind of pictured when David drew it, and we picked that bird because I really like the idea of that wading bird and that cleverness, and also it kind of had that. I won't say that our deck isn't based on rider weight, right? I mean, I feel like it's a very much all of our experience is based on rider weight. And it had that same feel as the 7 rider, that kind of creeping along with with that gait, with that walk, So
Yeah.
It had that to my mind.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like that.
Thanks. I wanted to ask another question around swords and birds and decks. Could you tell me, like, what are the decks that you use right now? How many do you have? Unfortunately, I've heard it's a snowballing addiction. You wind up with a bunch of. What decks do you have currently? You've mentioned a couple.
Yeah, so I have like 6. The ones I use most often are the Aleister Crowley and Frida Harris's Thoth deck. And I started using a Thoth style deck by an artist, M.M. Moline. This is actually her 7 of Swords.
That's beautiful.
I use Rider Waite sometimes, and what I actually use I do use your deck sometimes, but what I use it for more often is kind of like visuals, like pulling out some of the cards that I like a lot. A lot of the swords ones, but actually also a lot of the majors that have birds. I love the for death. I'm assuming they're ravens.
Crows, American crows. Yes. Yeah. No, it's.
But that one and your high priestess with the owl is what I probably draw most out of your deck. But I like kind of having them in front of me. But what I've been pulling for most days has been the Thoth, and I like that I like that it doesn't have like humans on the pip cards. Like that's one thing that like trips me up in the Rider Waite. But also it obviously makes it easy, or like without that I would not have learned how to tell what the cards in the other decks are. So it's definitely a great deck.
No, that's good. Thoth is so such a weird one for me because it's one I use, and it's blunt with me. It's got a tone that's different than some of my other decks. Rider Waite feels like kind of like your aunt that doesn't want to hurt your feelings, and Thoth kind of feels like your uncle that definitely does. Like,
yeah, well, especially with 7s, the 7s are like brutal in that deck. But yeah, the art in that is what gets me. The whole deck is just so beautiful.
Yeah, the one that you held up is gorgeous. That is really cool. I have never heard of that one. I'll have to look at that. That's very cool. Neil, anything else that we should hit on? What else? What other ideas have you been thinking about? Do you have anything that we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of like a bunch of what I had in mind. Just actually, we'll go back to the Crowley one. He has a funny line about the 7 of Swords that like definitely shows how negative is about it. And in his book, he calls it the rheumatic boxer who's trying to come back into the ring. So just like like fighting with your last gasp, which is not how I
Wow.
view it in other decks. But yeah, no, I mean that's pretty much everything that I had in mind, and just I really love what you've done with the deck. I'm glad that you're kind of flushing out the stuff on the minor cards now, because that was those were really the cards that I connected with most when I picked up the deck.
That's super cool. And we're working on, I would say, kind of fleshing that out and letting folks tell me what they find or what they see in it, which has been super useful to me to have a reflection back and to be able to look at that. It's been very cool.